Jake sat there gripping his beer bottle so tight his knuckles turned white. The words Emma had just spoken echoed in his head like a bad joke. "I think we should consider an open relationship," she had said, her tone casual, like she was asking him to change the brand of coffee they drank. But then she dropped the real bomb. "But only for me. You wouldn't really benefit from it anyway. I mean, you're just a mechanic." Just a mechanic. Jake let out a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. His heart pounded, but not from heartbreak. No, that ship had sailed. This was something else. This was the realization that the woman he had loved for 4 years had never truly respected him, that every kiss, every "I love you" had come from someone who saw him as a stepping stone, not a partner. And right then, as he looked into Emma's expectant eyes, waiting for him to agree, he knew one thing for sure. He was done being her safety net. But before we dive deeper into this insane story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories of justice and karma, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Jake had always been a man of simple pleasures. At 30 years old, he had built a life he was proud of, even if it wasn't extravagant. Working as a mechanic in a well-respected auto shop in Austin, Texas, he found satisfaction in fixing things with his hands, in taking something broken and making it whole again. There was an unspoken beauty in the way an engine hummed after a long day's work, the way grease and metal told their own stories. His biggest passion, though, was the restoration of his late father's 1969 Camaro SS, a project that had become more than just about rebuilding a car. It was about honoring a legacy. His father had always told him that cars, like people, needed care, patience, and the right hands to bring them back to life. Every weekend, Jake dedicated hours to the Camaro, running his fingers over the faded blue paint, picturing the day it would shine like new again. He had grown up in the shop, learning from both his father and later his boss Mike, who had become a mentor, almost a second father. The auto shop wasn't just a workplace, it was home. His co-workers, men who had spent years covered in oil and sweat alongside him, were his brothers. They had each other's backs, cracking jokes during lunch breaks and putting in the extra hours when one of them needed help. The work was hard, the pay was enough, but more than anything, it was honest. Jake had never wanted more than that: stability, integrity, and a future he could build with his own hands. For years, he had thought he would build that future with Emma. She had walked into his life 4 years ago, a burst of warmth and laughter, and it had felt like fate. Unlike the women who turned up their noses at a man who smelled like motor oil, Emma had embraced every part of him. She used to come by the shop on weekends, eager to learn, slipping on an old pair of overalls and handing him tools like she had always belonged there. She had laughed when she smudged grease on her face, called it war paint, and insisted on learning how to change a tire, just in case. Their relationship had been easy in the beginning, full of late-night drives and cheap diner meals that tasted better because they were together. She had talked about their wedding like it was a grand adventure, picking out a small ranch venue that felt intimate and real. "It's not about the size of the wedding," she'd said. "It's about the life we build after." Jake had loved that about her, the way she made everything feel simple and right. His family adored her. His mother had practically started calling her daughter before he even proposed. His sister had bonded with her instantly, and every Sunday, Emma had fit seamlessly into family dinners, passing mashed potatoes across the table like she had always been one of them. She had told Jake she loved the idea of a quiet life, of raising kids in a home filled with laughter and the smell of fresh bread and motor oil. She had made him believe in forever. But forever, it turned out, had an expiration date. Life with Emma had been easy, natural, the kind of love that didn't need grand gestures or constant validation. They had their routines, their own little traditions that made their days feel full. Jake would wake up early for work, the smell of fresh coffee often waiting for him because Emma, even when she didn't have to be up that early, liked making sure he started his day right. On weekends, they would cook together, a rhythm they had perfected over time. He handled the grill, she prepared the sides, always sneaking bites of whatever she was chopping while he pretended not to notice. Evenings were spent curled up on the couch, tangled in each other, watching movies they had seen a dozen times but never got tired of. She loved old romantic comedies, he loved action films, so they took turns picking. She would roll her eyes at his choices, but he caught her smiling during the high-speed chases and impossible fight scenes. He teased her about it, she denied it, and they'd laugh, knowing it was a game they'd never stop playing. Sundays were for family, a tradition neither of them questioned. They would drive to his mother's house for dinner, where Emma helped set the table and Jake listened to his sister fill them in on the latest drama in her life. His mom adored Emma, always sneaking extra servings onto her plate, always asking when they were going to give her grandkids. Emma would laugh and squeeze Jake's hand under the table, telling his mom, "We've got time," and they did. At least he had thought they did. They had talked about the future in small, quiet ways, making plans that felt natural rather than forced. The wedding was already set, a simple ceremony at the ranch they both loved, nothing over the top, just close friends and family. After that, maybe they'd start looking for a house, something small but cozy, with a backyard where they could sit under the stars on summer nights. Kids weren't an immediate plan, but it was a conversation they had often, imagining a life where little feet ran across the floor, where laughter echoed through hallways. There was a deep intimacy between them, the kind that wasn't just physical but built on something stronger. It was in the way Emma would absent-mindedly reach for his hand while they walked through the grocery store, the way she would leave little notes in his lunch when she packed it for him, inside jokes scribbled on napkins that made him smile in the middle of the day. It was in the way she leaned against him when they sat together, how she seemed to fit into the space beside him like she had always belonged there. Trust had never been something they had to work for. It had been there from the start, unshaken, unquestioned. Jake had never doubted her, never once felt the need to check her phone or wonder where she was. She had given him no reason to. She had loved him openly, fully. Or at least, that's what he had believed. Their life had felt like it was moving forward in the best way possible, steady and secure with nothing standing in their way. But looking back, Jake wished he had noticed the small cracks before they turned into fractures too big to fix. Emma's promotion came with excitement, celebration, and promises that nothing between them would change. Jake had been genuinely proud of her, knowing how hard she had worked for it. And when she rushed into their apartment that evening, practically glowing with excitement, he had pulled her into a hug, telling her she deserved every bit of it. She talked about bigger projects, higher pay, more influence in the company. She laughed when she admitted she had her own office now, something she had always dreamed of. Jake had listened, smiling as she went on about all the new opportunities this job would bring, how it could set them up for a better future. He had believed her when she said it wouldn't affect their relationship, that it would only make things better. But then the changes started, small at first, things he hadn't paid much attention to. New clothes appeared in their closet, expensive pieces from brands Jake had never heard of, replacing the comfortable jeans and sundresses she used to love. She spent more time in front of the mirror in the mornings, carefully applying makeup that she never used to bother with unless it was for a special occasion. She stopped swinging by the garage on weekends, stopped slipping into overalls and teasing him about how she could outwork him one day. Instead, she made excuses. Too tired, too busy, didn't want to get grease on her new outfits. Then came the late nights. At first it was the occasional extra hour, a last-minute meeting, a client dinner she couldn't miss. Jake understood. Jobs demanded things sometimes, and he wasn't the kind of man to make a fuss about it. But when those late nights turned into a regular pattern, when dinners sat cold on the table more often than not, he started to wonder. She always had an explanation, always reassured him it was just temporary, that she was just trying to impress her new boss and make the most of her promotion. He wanted to believe her, so he did. But it wasn't just the late nights. It was the way she started talking about work, about her new colleagues, about the different mindset she was adapting to. It was in the way she looked at him sometimes, like she was seeing him through a different lens, evaluating rather than simply loving. She never said it outright, but Jake felt it creeping into her voice, into the way she spoke about things now. Subtle comparisons between their lives. The way she talked about her coworkers and their big ambitions, their impressive careers. The way she stopped asking about his day with the same interest, as if fixing cars was somehow beneath her now. The shift wasn't just in her words, but in her actions, in the way she carried herself. She became attached to her phone in a way she never had before, always keeping it face down on the table, always taking calls out on the balcony instead of right next to him. If he walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly lock the screen, slipping the phone into her bag like whatever conversation she was having wasn't meant for him. She started canceling their date nights, always citing some work event, some networking opportunity she just couldn't miss. When he brought it up, when he told her he missed spending time with her, she brushed it off with a laugh, saying he was being dramatic, that they still saw each other every day. He told himself she was right, that maybe he was just overthinking things. But the feeling didn't go away. It sat heavy in his chest, a quiet, nagging thing that told him something wasn't right. The woman who used to crawl into bed with him at night and wrap herself around him like he was her safe place now lay on the far side, scrolling through her phone until she thought he was asleep. The woman who once fit so seamlessly into his life was slowly pulling away, slipping through his fingers like he was the one being left behind. Jake had never been the jealous type. He believed in trust, in giving people the space to be who they were without second-guessing their every move. So when Emma said she had a work dinner, he didn't question it. He kissed her goodbye as she left, dressed in one of her new designer outfits, hair and makeup perfect in a way that made her look like she was stepping into a different world, one he wasn't a part of. He told her to have fun and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Something fell off, but he pushed the thought aside. She had a new job, new responsibilities. Maybe he was just struggling to adjust. An hour later, while he was at home eating leftovers alone, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his buddy Matt, a guy he had known since high school, someone who never stirred up drama just for the sake of it. "Hey man, you know Emma's supposed to be at a work thing, right?" Jake frowned at the message, his stomach twisting before he even finished reading the next one. "I'm at that steakhouse on 6th Street. Saw her here with some guy. Not a work dinner, unless her job suddenly includes holding hands across the table." There was a photo attached, grainy from the dim restaurant lighting, but there was no mistaking her. Emma, sitting across from a man Jake had never met in person but recognized instantly. Ryan, her boss. Jake's fingers tightened around his phone as he stared at the image, the way Ryan leaned in, the way Emma tilted her head just slightly, smiling in a way that wasn't meant for a colleague. It sent a surge of something cold and sharp through his veins. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady as he typed back. "Appreciate it, man. Don't say anything. I'll handle it." He didn't storm out of the house. He didn't drive to the restaurant, didn't cause a scene. That wasn't his style. Instead, he sat there, forcing himself to breathe, staring at the picture until every excuse he wanted to make for her dissolved. When she came home later that night, slipping off her heels and sighing dramatically about how exhausting the dinner had been, he waited until she walked into the kitchen before speaking. "How was the work dinner?" He kept his voice even, watching for any sign of hesitation. Emma blinked at him, then smiled as she grabbed a glass of water. "Long, boring, you know how these things are. Just a bunch of industry talk." She didn't even flinch. She didn't even hesitate. That was what made his stomach churn the most. "Yeah," he said, leaning back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Where was it again?" "That steakhouse on Main," she said without missing a beat. "It wasn't on Main, it was on 6th. "Sounds fancy," he murmured, watching her closely. "Who all was there?" "Oh, the usual team," she said, turning her back to grab a plate from the cabinet. "Mark, Lisa, a couple of clients. Not Ryan?" She went still for half a second, barely noticeable, but Jake caught it. Then she turned back around, smiling, but this time it was forced. "Oh yeah, Ryan was there too?" He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and slid it across the counter to her. The picture stared back at her. "Huh," he said, tilting his head. "That's weird, because Matt was there and he only saw you and Ryan. No Mark, no Lisa, no clients." Emma's face paled, but she recovered fast, rolling her eyes as she picked up the phone and slid it back toward him. "Seriously, Jake, you're going to get all worked up over a dinner photo? I can't believe you're acting like this. It was just a work meeting. We were going over a client's strategy. Matt must have seen us before the others got there." Her voice was smooth, practiced, like she had been preparing for this moment. "Holding hands across the table is part of the strategy?" Jake asked dryly, not breaking eye contact. Emma let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "You're being paranoid. Do you even hear yourself right now? You're so insecure that you're getting jealous over my job?" Jake felt the first crack of doubt slip into his mind, even though his gut was screaming at him not to listen. He had known her for 4 years. She had never given him a reason not to trust her. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe the angle of the photo just made it look worse than it was. Maybe he was letting his own insecurities make something out of nothing. But deep down, in the part of him that had always known the truth before he wanted to admit it, he felt it. This wasn't nothing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something was wrong. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he really knew the woman standing in front of him anymore. Jake had felt the distance growing between them for weeks, but nothing could have prepared him for what Emma said that night. It was late, and he had just gotten home from a long shift at the shop. His hands were still stained with grease, his shoulders sore, but all he wanted was to grab a shower, eat something, and maybe sit on the couch with her like they used to. Instead, he walked into the living room and saw her sitting there, legs crossed, face unreadable, like she had been waiting for him. The moment he saw that expression, his stomach twisted. Something was coming, something he wouldn't like. "We need to talk," she said, setting her phone aside for once. He nodded, kicking off his boots, bracing himself. "What's up?" She hesitated for just a second, and then the words came out, smooth and practiced, like she had rehearsed them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she began, her tone careful, almost patronizing. "I feel like people grow, and sometimes relationships need to evolve with them." Jake frowned. "Evolve how?" She took a breath, as if preparing to deliver some great philosophical truth. "I think we should consider an open relationship." The words hit him like a slap. He stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking, but she didn't. She was serious. His pulse pounded in his ears, but his face remained calm. "An open relationship," he repeated slowly. "Yeah," she said, nodding as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "I've been learning a lot from my colleagues, seeing different perspectives. People aren't meant to be with just one person forever, Jake. It's outdated. This could be a good thing for us, a way to explore new experiences." His fingers curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his expression neutral. "So, let me get this straight. You want to sleep with other people, but still keep me around?" She flinched at his bluntness, but quickly recovered, rolling her eyes. "It's not just about that. It's about growth, about expanding our understanding of love. You've been stuck in the same place for years, Jake. You go to the same job, do the same things. I'm changing. I need more." There it was. The thing she had been hinting at for weeks, the shift in the way she looked at him, the condescension in her voice when she talked about her new world. She didn't respect him anymore. Maybe she never had. And worse, she thought he would just accept it, that he would nod along, tell her she was right, and let her do whatever she wanted while he sat at home like some loyal, obedient placeholder. Jake took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm, and then, just like that, an idea struck him. If she wanted to play games, fine, he could play too. He leaned back against the couch, tilting his head like he was deep in thought. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I've actually been thinking the same thing." The look on her face was priceless. Her mouth opened slightly, her brows knitting together. "What?" "I mean, it makes sense," he continued, rubbing his chin like he was seriously considering it. "We should both have the freedom to see other people. In fact," he reached for his phone, tapping the screen casually. "You think you could get me Ashley's number? She's always been real nice to me when I stop by your office." Emma's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her jaw clenched, her eyes darkened, and for the first time in this entire conversation, she lost her composure. "Ashley?" she snapped. "Why the hell would you want Ashley's number?" Jake shrugged, playing it cool. "Well, if we're doing this open relationship thing, I figured I'd start there. She's into classic cars, Maybe I'll take her for a ride in the Camaro." Emma shot up from the couch like she had been burned. "That's not what I meant." Jake kept his tone even, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "Oh, it's not?" "No," she snapped, crossing her arms. You wouldn't even know how to handle a woman like her." And there it was, the final nail in the coffin. Jake felt the last piece of whatever love he had left for her disintegrate into dust. "A woman like her," he repeated slowly. Emma waved a hand in frustration, pacing the floor. "You know what I mean, Jake. She's young, she's ambitious. She works in my world. She stopped, but it was too late. "Go ahead," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Say it." She hesitated, and then with a bitter laugh she muttered, "You fix cars, Jake. You work with your hands. You wouldn't fit in." He let the silence stretch between them, watching her face as the weight of what she had just said settled between them. He saw the truth for what it was now. She had never wanted an open relationship. She wanted permission to cheat without consequences, to indulge in whatever affair she had already started while keeping him in the background as a safe option. She had convinced herself that she had outgrown him, that her promotion had somehow elevated her above him, above the life they had built together. Jake exhaled slowly, then stood, shaking his head. "You know, Emma, I might work with my hands, but I'm not stupid." He grabbed his keys from the counter. "And I sure as hell ain't anybody's backup plan." Emma stared at him, realization dawning in her eyes, but he didn't give her the chance to speak. He walked out the door, knowing he had just closed it on a chapter of his life that was never meant to last. Jake woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling in his chest, the kind that sat there, unmoving, a weight pressing against his ribs. He had spent most of the night replaying every conversation, every moment, every red flag he had ignored. The picture from the steakhouse, the way she dismissed his concerns, the way she had panicked when he played along with her open relationship nonsense. It all pointed to one thing: she was lying, and she had been lying for a long time. He could have confronted her again. He could have sat her down, demanded the truth, and let her spin another web of carefully crafted excuses. But what was the point? He already knew. He just needed proof, the kind that couldn't be explained away, the kind that wouldn't leave room for gaslighting and manipulation. So instead of heading to the shop that morning, he called in sick. Mike, his boss, had known him long enough to hear something in his voice and not ask questions. "Take the day," he said simply. Jake parked a few streets away from their apartment complex and waited. Emma usually left for work at 7:30 sharp, her routine precise, her mornings predictable. But something told him today wouldn't be like the others. Sure enough, at exactly 7:25, she walked out of their building, dressed sharper than usual, her hair styled in a way that wasn't necessary for a normal workday. She wasn't in her usual office attire. This was different. A black fitted dress, heels that made her legs look longer, a designer handbag slung over her shoulder. She wasn't dressed for a long day at the office. She was dressed for someone. Jake stayed a few cars behind, keeping his distance as he followed her across town. He knew where her office was. He had been there before, dropped off lunch, met some of her coworkers. But she wasn't heading in that direction. She drove right past downtown, past the corporate buildings, past anything that looked remotely related to work. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a high-rise luxury apartment complex, one of those places where the rent was more than Jake made in a month. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he watched her park, step out, and glance around, as if checking to see if she had been followed. Then Ryan appeared. The man walked out of the building like he owned it, dressed in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, looking every bit the rich, self-important executive that Emma had apparently decided was worth throwing away 4 years for. Jake had never met him in person, but seeing him now, watching the way he moved, the smug ease of his posture, he already hated him. Emma didn't hesitate. She didn't look guilty, didn't act like someone doing something wrong. She walked right up to him, and before she even said a word, Ryan pulled her in and kissed her. Not a hesitant kiss, not a moment of weakness, a full, heated, passionate kiss, like it was something they had done 100 times before. Jake's hands trembled as he grabbed his phone and hit record. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat, a mix of rage and cold, hollow disbelief spreading through his veins. This was it, the confirmation he didn't want but needed. The betrayal playing out in front of him, so obvious, so undeniable. Emma laughed at something Ryan whispered in her ear. Jake couldn't hear the words, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. He had what he came for, the truth, and now she would have to face it. Jake didn't go home that night. He didn't want to see Emma, didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to look at her and pretend even for a second that she was still the woman he had loved. Instead, he drove straight to her parents' house, his grip tight on the steering wheel, his mind replaying the video over and over. He didn't know what he expected from them, but they deserved to know the truth about the daughter they had raised. When her mother opened the door, she looked surprised to see him. "Jake, honey, what are you doing here?" she asked, concern laced in her voice. Emma's father walked into the hallway behind her, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "Something wrong, son?" Jake took a breath, steadying himself. "Yeah," he said, stepping inside. "We need to talk." He didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, found the video, and pressed play. Emma's mother gasped the second she saw it, one hand flying to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. Her father, however, went completely still, his face darkening as the scene unfolded. The footage was grainy but clear. Emma, dressed up, her arms wrapped around Ryan, the way they kissed like they had nothing to hide. When the video ended, the silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Then Emma's father let out a sharp breath, shaking his head, his hands curling into fists. "I thought I raised a woman of integrity," he said, his voice low and dangerous. not a damn homewrecker. His wife let out a choked sob, sinking into the couch. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would she do this? She had everything with you, Jake. She was happy." Jake clenched his jaw. Guess she decided she needed more. Her father looked like he wanted to punch something. "Where is she now?" Jake exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Probably with him." Her mother looked devastated, her shoulders trembling. "I don't even know who she is anymore." Her father turned to Jake, his expression full of regret. "I want you to know, son, this isn't on you. You've always been good to her. You deserved better." Jake nodded, pocketing his phone. "I know." But he wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, Emma's company hosted a high-profile gala, a celebration of their latest successes. Jake knew Ryan would be there. Knew Emma would be draped on his arm, pretending she was some kind of power couple with a man who had already destroyed one family. But what she didn't know was that Ryan's wife had been tipped off, and Jake was about to make sure the entire room saw exactly who they were. He had sent the video anonymously, letting it circulate just enough before the event. As the attendees mingled, sipping champagne and networking, the large projector screen behind them flickered to life. And then, right there, in front of the company's elite, the footage played. The laughter in the room died instantly. Gasps echoed. People turned, eyes darting between the screen and the very real, very guilty people in the crowd. Ryan's wife, who had been standing just feet away from him, turned slowly, her face pale with rage, and then she slapped him, hard. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "You son of a bitch," she hissed, her voice shaking. "We have 2 kids at home, and this is what you've been doing?" Ryan stumbled back, but there was no escape. Emma, standing beside him, looked frozen, her face drained of color. People were staring, whispering, some recording. Jake, watching from the back of the room, didn't need to say a word. The damage was done. Emma had wanted a new world, a higher status, a shinier life. Well, now she had it, except instead of being the woman on the rise, she was the woman everyone in that room would remember for one thing, being the mistress who helped ruin a marriage. The fallout was swift and merciless. The morning after the gala, Ryan's name was plastered across every industry gossip site, the video making its rounds in company group chats and social media circles. By noon, his office was cleared out. The board of directors had held an emergency meeting, and within hours, Ryan was fired. Not quietly either. His reputation was shredded, his credibility gone. Clients withdrew deals, employees whispered about him in the hallways, and any hope he had of rebuilding his career in the city was officially dead. But that wasn't even the worst part. His wife wasted no time filing for divorce, and she came prepared. Armed with evidence, including the very public humiliation he had suffered, she walked into court and walked out with nearly everything: house, cars, primary custody of their children, and a substantial financial settlement. Ryan, who had once strutted around like he was untouchable, was suddenly a nobody. No money, no family, no career. His former colleagues didn't return his calls. His old friends stopped associating with him. The last anyone had heard, he had left town, trying to start over in some small firm states away, desperate to escape the wreckage he had created. And Emma? She had thought she would land on her feet, had convinced herself that her connections, her new status, would protect her. But she underestimated how quickly people turn on you when you're no longer useful. The executives who once praised her kept their distance, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Clients she had worked with refused to take her calls. Even the younger employees, the same ones she had tried to impress, mocked her behind her back, passing around the video with whispers and laughter. Her promotion was revoked almost immediately. "Resign quietly and we won't make this worse for you," HR told her, a polite way of saying she was finished. With no job and no prospects, Emma's perfect new world collapsed in on itself. The luxury apartment she had shared with Ryan, gone. She could no longer afford it. The high-end wardrobe she had spent thousands on, the designer shoes, the expensive bags, she had to sell them piece by piece just to cover her bills. She reached out to old colleagues trying to find a new job, but no one wanted to hire someone with that kind of reputation. Companies don't invest in scandal, and Emma had become a walking disaster. With nowhere else to go, she packed what was left of her life into a few suitcases and drove back to the only place she had left, her parents' house. It wasn't a warm welcome. Her father barely spoke to her. Her mother looked at her like she didn't recognize her anymore. The disappointment in their eyes was worse than any insult. She had built a future out of arrogance, out of betrayal, out of the belief that she was meant for something better than the life she had with Jake. And now she was back in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life she had thrown away, haunted by the realization that she had gambled everything and lost. Jake didn't waste time looking back. The moment he walked out of that gala, watching Emma's world crumble in real time, he knew he was done. There was no anger left, no sadness, just a quiet sense of finality. He had been holding on to something that had been dead for a long time, and now, for the first time in months, he felt free. He threw himself into his work, not as an escape, but as a reminder of who he was, of what had always grounded him. The garage had always been more than just a job. It was a part of him, a place where things made sense, where hard work produced results, where loyalty meant something. And Mike, his boss, had noticed. One evening, as Jake wiped the grease from his hands and locked up the shop, Mike called him into the office. The older man leaned back in his chair, studying him for a long moment before finally speaking. "You know, kid," he said, tapping his fingers against the desk, "I've been watching you these past few months. You stepped up, took on more responsibility, handled yourself like a leader." He let out a slow breath. "I'm not getting any younger, and this shop isn't going to run itself forever. What do you say we make it official? I want you as my partner." Jake blinked. He had never thought about it, never considered himself more than just a mechanic, but hearing Mike say it, offering him something that meant permanence, stability, it hit him in a way he didn't expect. "You serious?" he asked, his voice gruff. Mike smirked. "You think I joke about business?" Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust, about a future that was his, not one that someone else dictated. "I'm in," he said, and Mike grinned, shaking his hand. With that settled, Jake turned his attention back to something he had put off for too long. His father's Camaro. He had spent months working on it between shifts, pouring his energy into every last detail, every bolt, every inch of paint. It wasn't just about restoring a car. It was about restoring a part of himself, about honoring the man who had taught him everything he knew. One evening, after hours, he finally started it up. The engine roared to life, strong and steady, filling the shop with a sound that sent chills down his spine. He ran his hands over the steering wheel, letting the moment sink in. He had done it, and his father, wherever he was, would have been proud. It was around that time that he met Mia. It happened by chance at a small coffee shop near the garage. He had been stopping by for quick lunches, needing a change of scenery, and one afternoon, she was his waitress. She was different from Emma in every way, soft-spoken but confident, with a warmth that felt genuine. She had an easy way about her, the kind of presence that made people want to linger. "Rough day?" she asked, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee without being asked. Jake smirked. "Something like that." She didn't pry, didn't push for details, just gave him a knowing smile. "Well, if it helps, the pie here is the best in town." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You working on commission for that recommendation?" She grinned. "No, just trying to improve your day." It became routine after that, stopping by when he had time, talking a little more each visit. She was a nursing student balancing school and work, and she had the same kind of drive he recognized in himself. She didn't look down on him for what he did, didn't treat him like he was less because he worked with his hands. In fact, one day, when he mentioned the Camaro, her eyes lit up. "That's amazing," she said. "I wish I knew how to fix my car myself instead of getting scammed by every mechanic in town." Before he could stop himself, he offered to teach her the basics. A week later, she showed up at the shop in jeans and sneakers, hair tied back, completely unbothered by the grease and oil. She listened, asked smart questions, actually took notes, and when she climbed under the hood beside him, not caring that she got dirt on her hands, something shifted in him. Emma had spent years trying to mold him into something else, making him feel like he had to prove his worth. But Mia saw him for who he was and liked him anyway. No expectations, no judgment, just understanding. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt like himself again, and this time, he wasn't chasing someone else's version of happiness. He was building his own. Jake had always believed that love was built on trust, on loyalty, on the quiet, steady things that didn't need to be flashy or impressive. He had spent years thinking he and Emma were on the same page, that they had been building something real together. But in the end, It wasn't love that had failed. It was respect. Because real love, the kind that lasts, isn't about status or career titles or how expensive your clothes are. It's about looking at someone and knowing that no matter where life takes you, you're in it together. And Emma had never really been in it. She had been waiting for something better, convinced that success meant upgrading every part of her life, including the man she was with. But life doesn't work that way. There's no guarantee that chasing something shinier will lead to happiness. Emma had learned that the hard way. She had given up a man who would have stood by her through anything for a man who saw her as just another conquest. She had traded stability for excitement, loyalty for greed, and in the end, karma had made sure she felt the consequences. Ryan lost everything: his job, his marriage, his reputation. Emma, who had thought she was rising to a new level, had instead crashed harder than she ever expected. No job, no friends, no future in the industry she had fought so hard to be part of. Meanwhile, Jake had built something better, not just with his career, not just with the garage partnership or the Camaro he had restored, but within himself. He had learned that his worth had never been tied to his job title, that fixing cars didn't make him any less than someone who sat in an office all day. The right people saw value in hard work, in integrity, in the kind of loyalty you couldn't fake. People like Mike, who had trusted him enough to make him a partner. People like his mother, who had always known the kind of man he was. People like Mia, who didn't see him as just a mechanic but as someone with skills, with passion, with ambition. Looking back, Jake wouldn't have changed a thing. He had done what needed to be done, not out of revenge, but because people like Emma and Ryan didn't get to walk away without consequences. Some might say he should have left quietly, moved on without making a scene. But why should cheaters get to escape judgment? They had built their relationship on lies, and he had simply held up a mirror. But that raises a question. What would you have done? If you had been in Jake's position, if you had been the one watching the person you trusted throw everything away, would you have exposed them in front of everyone? Or would you have walked away, letting karma do the work? Would you have confronted them privately, given them a chance to admit their mistakes? Or would you have let them crash and burn the way Emma did? Let me know in the comments, because the truth is, there's no easy answer. At the end of the day, this isn't just about betrayal. It's about knowing your worth. We may work with our hands, but that doesn't make us any less worthy of respect. True love isn't about money, careers, or social status. It's about loyalty, honesty, and mutual respect. The moment someone starts seeing you as less, the moment they start believing they're better than you, the relationship is already over. Stay true to who you are, and the right people will value you for it. Because in the end, it's not about proving your worth to someone who never deserved you. It's about knowing your worth and never settling for less. Everyone has a moment in their life when they have to make a choice, stand up for themselves or let someone walk all over them. Jake made his choice and it changed everything. Now it's your turn. Have you ever faced a situation where someone underestimated you, disrespected you, or tried to make you feel like you weren't good enough? Have you ever had to stand up and prove your worth, not just to them but to yourself? Maybe it was at work, in a relationship, or even within your own family. Share your story in the comments below, because these conversations matter. They remind us that we're not alone, that people everywhere are fighting for their dignity, their self-respect, and their right to be treated with honesty. And if you've ever walked away from someone who didn't value you, if you've ever had the courage to say, "I deserve better," then you already know what real strength looks like. Don't forget to like this video if you found Jake's story inspiring, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for yourself. Together, we can create a world where loyalty, honesty, and respect matter more than status and wealth. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't anger. It's building a life so good that no one can ever make you doubt your worth again.